record on this computer. Ooh. Okay, guys, so please mind your language. You are now on candid camera.
Recording.
And I'm going to share my screen. So the topic for this evening is motors. And we have a long list of stuff to go through. And Blair, you're not supposed to be looking at this while you're driving, eh? You'll have to, I'm afraid you'll have to catch up later. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Promise I won't.
it'll be up on YouTube again, so you can take a look at if you think there's anything that you missed that's worth catching up on, which is possible but highly unlikely.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. So first thing is to just take a look at motor sizes. So I'm going to pin my own. I'm going to try and pin my own video so that I can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so the common motor sizes are FF50, also known as slim can. The ones that are in the Formula One cars, for the very good reason, they are tiny. They're thinner, flatter and more narrow than any of the other sizes. So that's why they use them in F1. Scaly is also using them in an assortment of cars, and even Carrera used them in a couple of their Can-Am cars. FF50, slim can. FC130, or short can. The reason why they're called short cans is because they are shorter than long cans. And the reason why they call long cans is because they're longer than short cans. That's just the long and the short of it. So this is an FC 130. The next relatively common motor is an FK 130. What you'll see here is that the case, the can, is pretty much the same overall dimensions as the FC, but it has and they all have magnets, as you may have noticed. The big difference is the FCs have this big plastic end bell, and the brushes are in there. The FK has a metal end bell, and the brushes, the leads come out of the end of the can itself, not out the top. Which is better? Don't know. Short can is by far sort of popular, extremely popular, pretty rare. Next one, flat 6. This is very similar to the long can in that it is pretty much the same length, but it is flatter. It is like, I don't know, it's more than a millimeter flatter than the regular long can. So it is useful when height is an issue. And then the big kahuna is the long can, or FK 130. So FK 180. So it's FK 130 is the short can with the metal end bell. FK 180 long can with a metal end bell. So as you can see, all three of these have the same configuration at the end for the leads. All good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Is it exciting? Hey, John, sorry, I was looking down at what I was doing, so I didn't notice you joining.
How you doing, boys? No problem.
Hey, John.
Right. So there we have all the common. There are some other odd sizes like the Scx Motors. They are a unique size. They're a unique configuration. They only fit in Scx cars. And then you have the old motors, but they are so rare. I'm not going to waste everybody's time with them. You know, the FT16 and the 16D, the 26D. I'm not going to bother much. I'm not going to bother with those at all. Okay, so can drive versus end bell drive. If I tab out, can you guys see? Let's see. No, you won't be able to see. No, I have to stop sharing the screen. So with on the FC 130s, you can see this motor has, most of the motors when you buy them, they have a shaft sticking out at either end, because some of the pods and some of the chassis need the pinion on this side. Some of them have need the pinion on this side. The nomenclature, the naming convention is, if the pinion is on this side, it's called a can end drive, because the pinion sits on the can side. If the pinion is over here, it's called end bell drive. Which is better? I personally prefer, for rigidity and for not getting oil on the brushes, which is not a good thing, I think it's actually better to have to use a can drive. Slotted makes pods that go both ways. Their more recent pods typically is can end drive. The other thing to take note of, if you have the two shafts together, is that the FF50, the slim can, is the only one that has a thinner shaft. It has a 1.5 millimeter shaft diameter, whereas all the others have 2 millimeter shafts. So you cannot interchange pinions between this and these. If you want to use a pinion, there are people that actually provide sleeves that you can put on the, an adapter to take it from 1.5 to 2 millimeters. I am not very comfortable with those at all. Generally, I'm not a big fan of the slim can motors, but there's nothing inherently wrong with them. And back to the agenda. So we've spoken about the different size motors. We've spoken about can drive versus end bell drive. We've spoken about shaft diameters and pinions, and now we get to the meat and potatoes. I think all of you are really, most of you are into real cars. So this torque, RPM, power is, to me, something that is very badly understood in slot cars and ignored, misunderstood, lack of knowledge. 90% of, maybe my wife has told me a million times I shouldn't exaggerate so much, but it would be damn near 90% of slot car people have no idea about these three concepts. If you talk about motors in slot cars, that's what people talk about. Everybody talks about RPMs as if that is the only thing that is important in motors. It is not. So let's take a look at why these other things are important. And because we have a bunch of car people here, this is going to be easier. RPMs, that's just how fast the motor spins. So that's important to know and understand. Torque, completely ignored. In a real car, in the old imperial system, the torque is measured in foot-pounds. In the metric system, it is Newton meters of torque. In slot cars, because they're tiny, it's gram centimeters. What does torque mean? Anybody want to explain it to the rest?
The feeling of torque is the twisting power of the engine or the motor, which creates the forceful movement of the car itself.
Exactly.
So a drag racer has a lot of torque. Something with a very economical engine probably doesn't. Right.
So that is, I think probably the easiest difference is between a 750cc motorcycle engine spins at 15,000, the red line is at 15,000 RPM. It makes 150 horsepower. A big V8 turns at in the olden days, 5,000 or 6,000 RPM, and it can also make 150 horsepower. It's all about the twisting, the leverage, how much it twists. And the torque is typically what gives you acceleration. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
And the overall measurement that takes into consideration RPMs and torque is it's I should have said slot car. In a real car, your power is measured in kilowatts or horsepower. But because slot motors are so tiny, it's measured in watts. Anybody have a sense of how many watts typical slot motors do? Okay, it varies from like 5 watt or something like that for a low power, low RPM, low torque motor, all the way up to like 30 watt in a real, and if Jamie were here, I would now have said a stonking motor, but one with a ton of RPMs and a ton of torque can give you up to 30 watts. That's one hell of a motor. I'll go into the different motors, the power of each of these a little bit later. But first, I'd like to talk about the characteristics, what typical DC direct current motors are like. Here I've got a graph showing you torque, increasing torque from 0 to however many, and RPMs. This could be from 0 to 30,000 RPM or whatever your motor is. So when they give you a motor and say it's a 25,000 RPM motor, that would be if you put 12 volts to the motor and have nothing attached to the motor. What the maximum RPMs would be that it would spin up to without it doing any work whatsoever. The other thing to know about electric DC motors is it delivers its maximum torque at 0. If you hold it so that it doesn't turn at all, That's when you get the maximum torque out of a slot car motor. As the RPMs increase, the torque reduces. So when the motor is at its maximum 3 RPMs, it can not deliver any torque whatsoever. So if horsepower is given with a constant factor, it is torque times RPMs. So if it has 0 torque at its maximum RPMs, and horsepower is torque times RPMs, torque is 0. So at its maximum 3 RPMs, it has no horsepower. Also at the beginning, because it has no RPMs, it has no horsepower. So it reaches its maximum at the maximum horsepower that you get out of a motor is at approximately half its RPMs. Now that's all good and well, and is it important to know that? Well, I suppose it is, because the problem is most people think, well, 25,000 RPM, if I put a 25,000 RPM motor in my car, it's going to run at 25,000 RPM and you know, I'm going to get tons of speed. But the problem is to get it to accelerate it from 15,000 RPMs to 25,000. It now has to overcome the internal friction, the bearings, the friction in the bushings, the friction in the gears, the drag, the braids on the ground, on the track, etc. So as it goes faster and faster over here, it has less and less torque to keep on increasing. So at one point somewhere over here, you get to the point where it only has enough torque to overcome the resistance of the car going forward. So it'll go up to somewhere over here. So 18,000 RPM or something like that. You're not going to get a car that the 25,000 RPM motor that's going to spin faster than, say, 18,000 RPM if it has to move the car. Make sense?
Yes, question for you. So if you go a higher RPM, which means you'll get a higher torque curve.
No.
You won't?
No. There is no natural relationship between maximum RPM and maximum torque. It's not if you have so many RPMs, you'll have so much torque. It all depends on the type of motor. For a slim can, the torque line will start somewhere over here. It'll have, this is perhaps a good time now to go to, let's see, bear with me. I have to share a different thing with you now.
Hey guys, how you doing? Oh,
Larry, you've missed all the important stuff.
I hope they're recording it.
Oh, yes, we are.
What is this recording that you speak of?
So we can look at it on the web later.
Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that.
You haven't been?
We should do that.
You haven't been doing that?
I'm pulling your socks and I'm having a sip of coffee, so that's why I was slow to start.
There you go.
Can you guys see my spreadsheet over here now?
Mhm.
Yes. Yep.
That's too big.
Yep.
That's about, okay. When I started in slot cars, 11, 12, 10, 12, I don't know, several years ago, I discovered this richdom of motors and stuff available. And being an engineer, I understood about power. So I looked at running against the guys that was at Archer the first few evenings, and I thought, ooh, I've got a big advantage over these guys. They're not looking at horsepower. So all that I need to do to knock everybody's socks off is find the motor with the most horsepower, put it in my car, and I'll just blow them off in the weeds. And I ended up with a slotted Ferrari 312 with a NSR King motor at 30-something thousand RPM and 350 centimeters of torque. And it was wheel spinning all the way down the straight until I let go of the throttle, and then it was completely and utterly undrivable. All of this was based on, there was a guy called Robert Livingston that put on the internet, he had what a motor list. What he actually did is, for just a consolidated list of all the motors that were available at that stage, by all the manufacturers. And he showed what can size they had, the spec RPM that the manufacturer said that the motor would turn at. He tested several of them to see what RPM he actually got. Some of the manufacturers had torque specs. He tested some others. And then I added over here a column for what the spec number of watts were and what the tested number of watts were. So earlier when I spoke about, how many watts you get for different motors. So Kevin, sorry, all this to say is the RPMs versus the torque is a characteristic of the motor, the number of winds on the armature, the magnets, the gap, the everything. So you can have high RPMs and low torque, or low RPMs and high torque, or in some cases, high RPMs and high torque. So you have to figure out what you want to do. I think it's probably easier to go down to some of the NSR motors. If you, we're all familiar with the 20,000 RPM Shark motor. That's what's in the stock NSR cars. They're supposed to be rated at 20,000 RPM at 12 volts. Robert tested it at just over 20,000. It's supposed to have 164 centimeters of torque. He tested it at 203, supposed to be 8.2 watts. Tested, if you take the tested RPM and the tested torque, it actually came up to 10.3 watts. So this gives you a sense of, everybody knows what an NSR Shark short can 20,000 RPM motor feels like. That's a 10-watt motor. So let's take a look at the motor that I got to put in my Ferrari 312. It's a long can motor. Bless you. That was my wife sneezing.
Bless you.
They say bless you, Esme.
Thank you.
She says thank you. So 38,500 RPM, 310 centimeters of torque, just about 30 watts compared to 10 watts. So can you see why I thought I was going to blow everybody away?
Yeah.
And could you see why I couldn't drive the damn thing at the end of the day? Because it's like having a 1960s Mini with an 800 horsepower Lamborghini motor in it.
Yeah.
It was just totally unmanageable. And just for what it's worth, the NSR long cans, these are the common long can motors that they typically use in their cars. They're all long cans, FK 180s. They're all rated at 21,400. They're all at sort of similar, very high torque, and they're all mid-teens to high-teen watts. So these are Scx motors. So what I wanted to highlight over here is, let's take a look at this motor, the latest incarnation of the long can 21,400 RPM motor. This gives 350 gram-centimeters of torque, almost 19 watt. This is the same RPMs, similar RPMs to, let's see, this is what the 22,000 RPM short can motor does also. So it's 21,000 versus 21,400, so it's very close. 155 gram-centimeters of torque against 350 gram-centimeters of torque. Completely and utterly a different animal. This is like, let's take it in cars. This is a 95 horsepower car. This is a 187 horsepower car. That is one hell of a difference. So whenever you buy a car or you want to remotor a car, this is important stuff to understand. If the cars weigh the same, the long can motor is going to have the same weight and you use the same gearing. It's going to have like twice the torque at the rear wheels than the short can. Now, guys, I struggle to feel the difference between these two motors. There is a difference, but you have to, you know, it's the RPMs are close, the torque is supposed to be close. These were oddball numbers, but you know, they're supposed to be pretty close to the same RPM, pretty close to the same torque. But if you drive the same car with this motor, and you have the same one with, this motor, they are totally different. And if you take a look at the gearing of, say, a NSR Porsche 917, it's close to 3-to-1. If you have a, say, a Mosler with a long can motor in it, and it has this motor, it'll be just over 2-to-1 the gearing. So the characteristics of the two motors are completely different. So you're gearing this very torquey motor, you're gearing a lot lower so that it doesn't just wheel spin and go nowhere, but it should then, you should be able to get the same or better acceleration than this motor. And if you gear it correctly, it's going to have a heck of a lot higher top speed. So these two motors, you will gear completely differently. If you have the same gearing on the two, either this one would be a complete dog and not accelerate at all. Say you gear both of them at 3-to-1. This one would sort of, or say, yeah, if you gear them both at 3-to-1, this one would accelerate okay and have a reasonable top speed. This one would just be wheel spinning and have the same top speed as the other one. It'll just wheel spin all the way to the same top speed. If you gear both of them at 2.1-to-1, this one would accelerate well and have a momentous top speed. This one would accelerate like treacle. And because of the gearing, it won't pull high RPMs in any case. So it'll accelerate badly and not have as high a top speed as you would think in any case. Have I confused the hell out of everybody now?
Nope, sounds good.
No, I'm good.
Robert Livingston had this in a just a table on the internet. I laboriously copied and put this into a spreadsheet and did the formulas to calculate the horsepower, the wattage. If you guys want, I can certainly send you a copy of the spreadsheet. It's, he has,
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like one too, Alwyn. please.
Okay.
That'd be nice.
It's a small spreadsheet. I'll send it out to everybody. Those that don't want it or don't need it can just ignore it and delete it. And those people that do want it can take a look at it. The unfortunate thing is he hasn't updated this for about 5 years. So some of the information is a little bit old, but really if I take a look at these motors, these are pretty much the NSR motors that you still get today. They've changed them a little bit, but it's not hugely different. Same goes for instance, the slotted motors.
I didn't see the flat 6 on that NSR thing. Oh, that's a slotted one. Sorry, forget it.
Yeah, I decided not to put the slotted motors with the NSRs, Ross.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I was thinking flat 6 was NSR. It's not.
No, it's Porsche.
Yeah, you're right.
But then it's not a motor, it's an engine.
Oh, yeah. I got to get the terminology right here.
I use them interchangeably, and I think most people do. It's except for the pedants amongst us. So yeah, the most of the common slotteds that you have one of the probably has this motor in it, the standard orange end bell. They've gone to a new orange end bell now that's a darker orange. It's like a burnt orange, and the characteristics are slightly different, but the basics are still the same. The one that was in some of the older Group C cars is, I believe, this one or this one. No, it'll be this one. So it's typically this is 7.5 watt versus 9.8 watt. So that's why the more modern orange end bell, when you're preparing a car for the Group C, is a bit better than this one, even though this one is rated at 23,000 and this one is rated at 21.5. All good so far?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, there are just a ton of motors in here. There are some new flat 6s, but again, they're pretty similar. And once you understand what to look for, you should have no problem. All of the reputable manufacturers have, if you can see, it actually has, the NSR motors have on them the RPM over there, and it also has the torque over there. So, but not everybody does that. The flat 6, for instance, I've got some plain brown wrappers over here. So this becomes difficult. You have to remember which motor is which motor, otherwise you get lost. The flat 6 also has the RPMs and the torque listed on it at 12 volts. Now, the industry standard is to rate motors at 12 volts. But if you take a look at some of these shady characters, most of the SCX motors are actually rated at 14.8 volts. So be very careful with that.
Like what Janice, I mean, the Ninkos.
Yeah, Ninko
Yeah,
is.
Ninko is, let's take a look at that. Ninko, yeah. So, yeah, if you take a look at the rating on the motor, I don't have a loose Ninko motor laying around, but if you take a look at the rating on the motor label, and if you take a look at when you buy the motor online, it will give you the rating at 14.8 volts. That makes a massive difference. Because this is perhaps a good time to take a look at something else. What is the effect of voltage? RPM is directly proportionate to voltage. So say you have a motor that would turn 20,000 RPM at 12 volts, at 10 volts. I'm going to make it easy for my math. So it does 20,000 RPM at 10 volts. If you bump it up to 12 volts, if you increase the voltage by 20%, the RPMs would increase by 20%. So 20,000 RPM at 10 volts would be 24,000 RPM at 12 volts. All good? Torque is exactly the same. If you have 100 gram centimeters of torque at 10 volts, at 12 volts, you'd have 120 gram centimeters of torque. So power is basically the formula for horsepower is basically torque times RPM. There's a constant in there, but it's so horsepower or power is proportional because you're multiplying something that is proportional with something else that's proportional. Horsepower is actually proportional to the square of the voltage. So if you increase the voltage by 20% from 10 to 12 volts, your motor's watts will go up by 44%. So be careful of just cranking up the voltage.
When you say the watts go up, I mean, I know that means that the draw on the power supply is going to go up 44%, right?
Yeah.
Or I mean, it's going to go higher.
Yes, if the power, because it's both volts and amps, yes.
Right. Okay, but but the actual speed of the motor is actually only going to go up 20%, right?
The RPMs, yes, but the torque, it's the same as going from a 100 horsepower car to a 144 horsepower car.
Right.
That's the best analogy that I can give you. It's not, if you turn up the voltage from 10 to 12 in a real life car, that doesn't mean you'll go from 100 horsepower to 120 horsepower. It means you're going from 100 horsepower to 144 horsepower. If you don't understand what that feels like, go and test drive some cars. So what it'll mean, it'll increase your torque and your RPMs. So you'd have more acceleration and you'd have more top end. So you win two ways.
The only thing is you got to be able to keep the horsepower down to the ground and keep it there without spinning it, right?
Yes, and you have to be able to manage the top speed as well. So So just be aware of the fact that if you crank the voltage, you're getting a double whammy in terms of performance. You're increasing the acceleration and the top speed.
So this goes to the discussion that you've often mentioned about how we can control our motor power and torque by choosing a voltage from our control box at our control station. And you can fine tune basically the feel of your car based on how much voltage you're giving it.
Yes. So at the end of the day, how important is it to know this? Well, not really. Well, I think it's important, but then again, I'm an engineer, so I think all of this kind of crap is important. But the important thing is that in reality, I just want to caution you against cranking the voltage because it gives you that double whammy. And I think if I've said this once, I've probably said it 348,217 times, give or take one or two, that more power is not necessarily a good thing. More power makes a car difficult to drive, and staying in the slot is a hell of a lot more important than how much speed you can get down the straight. It's because if you have less power, you're going to find that it's going to be easier to go around the corner, so you'll end up going through the corners faster. On top of that, you're not going to deslot as often, so you're going to win two ways with a less power. We all have to learn that lesson for ourselves. I can say it however many times I want, and I just want to urge you to try that. Okay. I just want to have a quick chat about typical characteristics of different motors and talk about what determines maximum torque and RPM for a given voltage. If I were to generalize, short cans, high RPM, very low torque. Sorry, did I say short can? Slim can.
Mm-hmm. Slim.
But you knew what I meant. Short can, sort of middle of the road. It has decent RPMs and decent torque. And generalized, you can get some really skookum torque short can motors and really, high RPM, high torque. But as a rule, sort of, 20, 25, up to 30,000 RPM. Typically, you can go as low as on the scaly motors, they're like 100 gram centimeters, and you can get motors up to almost 300 gram centimeters, but most typically you'd find somewhere between 120 gram centimeters to just over 200 gram centimeters of torque in a short can motor. Very common. The FK130s tend to be more powerful than your regular FC130. Very few, I can't offhand think of any ready-to-run cars that come out with FK130s. It's not.
BSRFs.
Sorry?
BSRFs.
Yes, I said no commonly found. How many TSRFs is in our group?
Oh, okay.
I have one. I think it's the only one out of, if there are 1,000 cars in our group, I think that's the only one. That's the only TSRF.
Fly have that
Yes.
motor, don't they?
Some
racing.
fly racing cars have the FK130 motor. You're right, Ross.
Yeah.
But
And even sometimes those are a little bit of a struggle to drive.
they tend to be unpleasantly powerful.
Yes.
And yeah, so The king of the heap in terms of torque, long can. Similar RPMs to short can, but a lot more torque. So this is perhaps, and the flat six is sort of halfway between the two. So, but you need to take a look at the different individual motors to take a look at the characteristics. So why do you get such widely divergent RPMs and torque out of the same size motor? Typically, two things that are the most important. The one is magnets. The stronger the magnets, the more the torque, the more the brakes. And by the way, torque and brakes are frequently go hand in hand. A motor that has a ton of torque would typically have a ton of brakes as well. So just remember that. So magnet is probably the biggest influence on torque. RPMs is typically the gauge of the wire and the number of turns of the wire on the armature. So between magnet, thickness of wire, and length of wire, a number of turns, is how the manufacturers set out to get different RPMs and different torques. That's really by the by. Now, the one thing that I found is there are some motors that have what's called neodymium magnets. They are just a lot stronger than regular Nico something, whatever magnets. So I don't typically like them. And part of the reason why you get more torque out of the a long can is because it has longer magnets, it has a longer armature, it just develops more torque. So that's why typically you find more torque out of the long can motor than the short can. Or, you know, if it has the same number of windings and the same thickness of wire and the same strength of magnet, you will just find, because of the longer armature and longer magnets, that the long can motor would have more torque. Everybody with me so far?
Yep.
Yep.
And what else did I want to cover? I think we're going through it pretty quickly. Okay, braking, we did speak about braking. So what normally influences braking is typically what influences the torque. And more torque, more brakes. And so you'll find long cans have a ton of brakes. The little slim cans, virtually no brakes. But of course, you adjust that by changing the gearing, because at the end of the day, you're probably looking to get the same kind of torque at the back wheels, regardless of what motor you're using, how many RPMs or how much torque it has. Or yeah, it's so you change the. You will find that the torque at the back wheels would typically end up very, very similar. Because if you end up with too little torque at the back wheels, it won't accelerate properly. If you have too much torque, it is unpleasant to drive and wheel spins too much. So that is with gearing. So if you will typically find that if you have a motor with a ton of torque, you would gear it down to something like 2.1 or 2.3 or 2.5 or whatever. And if you have a motor with very little torque and high RPMs, you'd end up at 3 or 3.5 to 1. Okay, some miscellaneous topics.
Before you get to the miscellaneous, can you just go back to the braking characteristics for a second?
Yes, sir.
There's also a dial on our controllers to increase or decrease braking.
Yes. What's
being utilized there if the braking characteristics are fixed for the motor?
When you, at zero brakes, you're basically having an open circuit on the controller side. So the motor spins freely. It's if you're holding it in the air and revving it up and just letting it go, and it'll just spin down. If when you turn to maximum brakes, you're creating a short over the motor. So you're turning it into a generator. So the motor is actually trying to generate power. So the more power you want it to generate, the more, you know, it's like you need the power to turn a generator, and that's what you're doing with a motor. So no brakes, no generation effect. Lots of brake, lots of generation effect. So all that you're doing is modulating the resistance over the motor when you let go of the throttle.
Okay.
In the olden days, Tim, you used to actually turn around and put a couple of D cells on your controller, and that would turn around and feed an extra 1.5 to 3 volts of backward current into your motor to give you even further braking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's sort of active braking, while while what's normally used in your controller is passive braking. You know, it's what in a Prius, it's they use what's called regenerative braking. I don't know if you've ever heard that. If you let go of the gas in a Prius, you'll see that it starts charging the battery. So that's like running against compression on an internal combustion engine. Same thing with a slot car motor. You're turning the motor into a generator, and you're turning it with little brakes, a small amount of generation, lots of brakes, as much generation as you can get out of the motor. So basically a dead short.
Yeah.
So are you actually adding a little bit of negative current back to the motor when you go into braking through the slotted controller when you're...
No.
No?
No. You are not putting energy into the car.
Okay.
It's yeah, and I think my preference in braking is also pretty well known. I don't like a lot of brakes in slot cars because I find a lot of brakes is similar to a lot of torque, insofar as it makes the car difficult to control. I'm all for smoothness, and smoothness you get with not absurd amounts of acceleration and not absurd amounts of braking, but that's by preference.
Larry, did you say they used to put a couple of D cells on your controller?
Yep.
D cells, the big ones.
Yep.
Really?
Or a couple of C cells, doesn't matter. It's 1.5 volts either way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
but
thinking...
Ross, I understand some of the clubs objected if you started bringing in truck batteries. That's interesting because we never, in the 60s when I raced in a club, we never did that. We just had the little MRC barrel controllers with the external brake wire that basically just shorted out the motor under braking. Okay, couple of miscellaneous things. Price, quality, value. The most expensive motor must be the best, right?
No.
No, it's an interesting thing that in a certain respect, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If you ask me what I consider to be pretty much the best motors you can buy, I go for NSR. I find they have consistently good quality, consistently smooth, well-balanced, smooth. The power is consistent. It's not you get one motor that's at 18,000 RPM and another one with the same label gets you 24,000 RPM. typically very consistent in terms of RPMs and torque, and they're reliable.
Is Murray gone?
Sorry?
I'm just talking to myself here. I was just wondering where the hell Murray's gone. Did he depart?
It looks like, I think I bored him.
Yeah, yes, okay.
You know, the other manufacturer that I think has very high quality products is Slotted. But I have to tell you, there is one motor that I will never use in a proxy car. If I'm going to send a car away for extended time to run, I will never put a slotted orange end bell in it. Actually, I would be very hesitant to put any slotted motor in a proxy car. The only motors that I've ever had fail was a slotted orange end bell and a slotted boxer motor. They seem to get gunk on the commutators, and then all of a sudden you'd find it wouldn't rev past 5,000 RPM or 3,000 RPM. So, and then what you have to do, you pick up the back of the car and go full throttle on your controller, and you find it goes and it revs up to maximum, and all kinds of spark and smoke comes out of it. And then it's okay again for a little while. And I've had that on both their slotted, the slotted short can and long can motors. I've not had it with any other manufacturer's motor, not one.
Is that like a buildup of carbon or anything in the wiring?
I don't know if you know what, I'm not going to take a motor apart, but if you take a look in here at the end bell side, what you find, there's a little arm that goes down over here. At the end of the shaft, there's what's called a commutator. It has 3 or 4 segments that are separate from each other, that puts the wire, the current through different windings, poles on the armature as it revolves. Now, what needs to happen is that the commutator, the different poles on the commutator, need to be electrically isolated. They shouldn't be shorted. The brushes that they use on this, so that the current goes through from here, where you can't see, through the brush onto the commutator that has the wire, one end of the windings around the armature, and the other end goes to the next commutator pole on the commutator. What happens is on these small, cheap, low quality motors, the brushes that carries the contact onto the commutator is rather soft, and they wear, and you get a buildup of that's basically carbon and some metal stuff impregnated. It builds up between the two, and then it shorts out the two sides of the wire, the 2 poles on the commutator. So that's what causes the hassles. Typically what they say is, if you put in an electrical contact cleaner, if you spray it, if you get this problem, you can spray in some electrical contact cleaner, sort of like you spray in the contact cleaner in over here, so that it gets to the...
Give me a moment here. I can put you up an armature and an end bell and everything.
Okay.
Okay. I guess my voice is coming through now, and is it
Yep.
turn it down to you, or what?
Just keep on making a noise and then show what you got.
Okay.
Let's clarify that, the electrical motor part.
Okay, here's the scale auto. See here, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the armature. If you look at it, you'll see the commutator and you'll see the little black line in between.
Oh, that's okay.
See the little black line in between? Okay,
That's
that's your commutator segments.
Yeah.
And then your brushes are like
Close,
so.
Larry. Back a little. A little, too far.
okay. Speak again, Larry.
There we go.
Okay, this is
Speak,
the
Larry.
angle with the brushes.
You've got to keep on talking to show. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so
Keep it a little bit further away. You're too close to the camera. We can't see. There you go.
okay.
Now talk.
All right, so as you can see, the brushes are coming down here, and if I can just get a little screwdriver, a pin here, I'll just separate the two,
Lift it up, Larry.
like so. You see that? You see it, and then the brush, the commutator, and that goes in between it, in between the brushes. On the older, I was going to say,
16Ds and 26Ds, they had removable brushes with springs on them.
exactly. I was just going to say, I could show you on my Pitman 65, the brushes and everything else, but I don't know.
I wouldn't bother, Larry. No,
Yeah.
Nobody uses the old 16Ds and 26Ds.
Right. Okay. But anyway, it gives you a better idea of what you're looking at. Does everybody see that? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So Tim, you can see there's a gap between the two brass or bronze commutators,
Yeah.
and that builds up with conducting material, and then it shorts it out, and then all hell breaks loose. So if you spray in a contact cleaner there, or even alcohol, if you drink enough alcohol, then you don't care anymore that the motor doesn't work.
That's true.
Sorry. No,
Have you also, Alwyn, have you also dropped motors into a glass jar, whatever, of water and alcohol or any liquid, running your motors in the liquid to clean out any of the carbon or any of the buildup?
That is I don't know if one would call it common, but it is a practice to run in motors in water, or water with a little bit of alcohol in it, because they say when you start running in a motor initially, that's when you wear away the most of the brushes, and when the motor gets manufactured, the surface of the brush that leans up against the commutator is flat. So what you want to do is you want to run it in so that it wears to match the curvature of the commutator, so that you have the best possible contact. So the theory is, if you put it in water and run it for long enough, you start wearing the brush to match the curve on the commutator. And because it's in a liquid, you're rinsing away the material that you're wearing off. So the theory is, if you do that, the motor will run better. You'd have a good contact, plus you won't have any of the crud on between the different poles. I tried it once and it didn't do anything for me, and it's a big schlep. So I, quite frankly, couldn't be bothered. Yeah, is that right or wrong? I don't know, but if you get on a 22,000 RPM motor, if you get 300 RPMs more, I defy anybody to feel that difference or to see any difference in that time. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I did that once with a motor. I got all fancy. I didn't run it in water. It was strictly isopropyl alcohol. There's a little bit of muck came out of the motor to start off with, and then when I put the car on the track, nothing. No, I couldn't feel any difference, see any difference. Total waste of time.
So getting that junk out doesn't really matter, it sounds, from your experiences.
I couldn't be bothered with running in a motor, quite frankly. I'll run a couple of slow laps with a new car, and then I just run it the way I normally would. The one that I did, I have there's an RPM checking app on for your cell phone. I have an iPhone, and it's called Jiri or something like that, and it basically measures the sound, the frequency of the sound, and it is a quite accurate way of measuring RPMs. I measured it before and after, and it changed from something like 21,500 to 21,600. And so I go, why the hell did I just take an hour or more of 2 hours of faffing around getting this prepared and doing it? It seemed pointless.
I was just wondering if it meant more, not so much for performance, but for longevity. You said the slotted motors will possibly crap out. So I thought maybe that kind of process would give them longer lifespan.
It is possible, but then again, I've never had that problem with any other brand of motor.
Okay.
So it's, maybe the slotted brushes are just softer than others.
Great. Thanks for getting into that.
The early slotted orange end bell motors had a lot of trouble. I don't know if they had a lot, but they did have a problem there. I've got some new ones. They don't seem to give any trouble. Yeah, maybe cleaning those old orange motors would be an idea, but I'd rather just get rid of the thing and put a Piranha motor in it.
Yeah.
And that is actually what I was going to get to on the topic, the price, quality, value thing.
Yeah.
You know, slotted motors are close to 20 US. NSR motors are 20 US basically. And then the Piranha motors are like less than $10 typically. And I find them to be any day as good as any of the others. So I would definitely, if I were have to buy motors for just running, Piranhas would be it. No ifs, buts, or maybes, just for regular racing. And I would crank the voltage if I wanted more power, and I would lower the voltage if I wanted less. So I think they make fantastic motors.
No doubt about it.
There is now also, Slot Car Corner, I have a new brand called Predator, which is also, they come in two performance levels. There's a 18,000 RPM and a 25,000 RPM. And those are less than $10 US apparently. I haven't had one yet, but initial comments are very, very positive.
For both of them, Elwin?
Yeah. I mean, the 18,000 is obviously, that's a very low power motor. It also has similar, like 85 gram-centimeters of torque apparently. The 25,000 RPM is something like 25,000 RPM and 160 gram-centimeters of torque. So
That's
that
nice.
is similar to a slotted 25K or NSR 25K motor.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
And
I'd like to add that Professor Motor and their hot rod motors, they're about 26,000 RPM, but the braking seems very, very poor on them compared to the other ones. I don't know whether they use a different style magnet or what, but I know I've got 5 or 6 of them. They rev like hell. They go pretty good, but the braking is always not great.
going is good, but stopping is also important at some stage.
I like brakes.
The other one, you get some motors that have ball bearings on both ends. Is this good, bad, or indifferent? I'm sort of neutral about it. Scale Auto had some 25,000 RPM, no, 20,000 RPM motors, both short can and long can motors that had ball bearings. Those were stellar quality motors. Unfortunately, they only made a smallish batch of them. You cannot, they were known as the blue can Scale Auto ball bearing motors. Those short can motors with ball bearings were brilliant motors. Was it because of the ball bearings? No, I think it's probably just, they were just great motors. So ball bearings, I can take them or leave them on a motor.
What do you feel about ball bearings on the rear wheel axle?
I can take it or leave it as well. Larry, I don't think there's a huge amount of benefit to it. Getting them aligned is a pain. Getting them mounted properly so that sorry, that they don't turn in the bearing holders and things like that. And over time, they tend to, because you have to oil them, they pick up crud. And a ball bearing with valve grinding paste in it is worse than just a plain bronze bushing. So I would not bother spending money on ball bearings on a motor or on the back axle. If the car comes with it, okay, I'm not gonna, throw a tantrum, but I really, on slot cars, I don't really see the point. Neodymium magnets, yes or no? I had an interesting experience with the Piranha 25K motor. It's the only motor that I have that has neodymium magnets. And in Sidewinder configuration, I found it attracted the axle so much, I found that the back wheels were difficult to turn. I kid you not. So much so that I tried finding titanium or stainless steel axles.
Who is it?
It's that guy with the papers.
So the problem with most of the stainless steel axles that I found is that they were ferritic stainless steel, not austenitic or martensitic, so they're still slightly magnetic. So to me, if you are going to race on plastic sectional track or a track with regular braid, steel braid that's magnetic, it's probably worth it having a motor with strong magnet attraction. None of the tracks that I don't think I've ever even had a proxy car that ran on any of those, so I wouldn't bother. So to me, it also falls into the category I don't really care one way or the other. If it has it, okay. I'd probably prefer not to have it because with a Sidewinder issue. But hey, I put it in one of the GT3 proxy cars that I was comparing to decide which one to send in, and the motor, even with the attraction, the car ran well. I didn't end up sending that one in, but for whatever.
Doesn't the Scale Auto use the Magna braid down there?
You mean Scale Racing Center?
Yeah, Scale Racing Center.
Yes. But any race that you run down there is very strictly prescribed what you can or cannot use. Any race that I've been down there, I've been there for the 24-hour races. I was down there for a 12-hour Scale Auto race, and you have no option. You have to use what is specified. So none of the motors that we used in any of those classes were high magnetic attraction motors. So I can remember, no, that was magnet. So no, I've never run a heavy magnet car on a braid track that has magnetic attraction. So, but it will make a difference. I can assure you, it will make a difference.
The BRMs and that, do they have magnets in those cars or not?
Nope.
Okay.
Guys, this is sort of pretty much what I had from my side. So now we're down to the catch-all, anything else. And we're almost just over 5 minutes from the scheduled end of our chat.
Well, sorry, I had to take off there for a few minutes, guys. I just got subpoenaed at the front door to go in and testify about a motor vehicle accident I did the estimate for 11 years ago.
11 years ago.
11
But
years
you can
ago.
remember it like yesterday, can't you, Murray?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Jesus, I'd heard ICBC was pretty slow. What the hell there, Murray?
Well, they're dealing with an old guy now, so what can we say?
Jeez.
Anyway, I actually turned 70.
How you doing, Murray?
Hey, Larry, how you doing?
Good, good. Still cooking anyway.
Actually, Alwyn, could I ask one quick question?
You can ask as many as you like.
Okay, just back to the gearing. What was the ratio for higher torque and lower torque?
If you have say a high torque long can motor, 350 gram centimeters,
Right.
I would probably go for low twos, 2.1, 2.2, thereabouts, 2:1.
To 1 ratio, okay. And then if
If
you
you
got the
have
lower torque,
a slim can that has 30,000 RPM and 50 gram centimeters of torque, I'd probably go to 4:1.
okay. So the lower the torque, the higher the ratio.
Numeric ratio, yes.
Okay, thank you. I did have it right.
And that was in that, the email that you asked me to resend. That was sort of what I described there. You have a very nice forehead, Murray. Okay, that's better.
Take care.
Guys, Murray obviously has a high definition camera because it's taking video of his head, top of his head.
I'll stand up. This is a free camera from a friend of mine.
Now we got your logo.
That's better. Now you look like Ross.
Hmm.
Yeah. Sit back, Murray. Enjoy yourself.
Yeah, well, Ross, I'm sure glad you and I don't have any gray hair.
Yeah. It's the lighting, Murray. Blame it on the lighting.
Hmm.
We're all blonde, by the way.
Platinum blonde.
Hey, guys, at least we have hair.
Yeah, true.
I don't have much.
Well,
The top's going pretty bald.
most of us are slightly challenged.
Oh.
Alwyn, thank you very much. It was a fantastic session of a lot of insights. I appreciate that.
No, it's my pleasure. I
Have
hope
you
it's, you know,
ever done anything to the SCXs as far as playing with the motors and that? Because I've heard that if you change some of the brushes on those, they pick up pretty good.
Larry, the expression that springs to mind is polishing a turd. In case you haven't realized, I'm not a big fan of Scx Motors. It's they have the RX42, the RX42B, which is a little bit better, the RX42H, which is in their pro cars, which is higher RPM, higher power. They have some RK motors that I think they only start coming into their own at about 97 volts, maybe a little bit less than 97.
Maybe.
It's I'm just not. I'm not a big fan of they have very unique motors that have some very unique characteristics, and I just don't like them. So yes, I'll keep the motor in the car if it has it in. But geez, if you have a car with an RX42, by all means swap it out for an RX42B if you can. Of all their motors, I think their RX42B is the best of the bunch, the least bad of the bunch.
25,000?
So all their normal ready-to-run cars up to a certain point had the RX42s, and then at one stage they swapped over to the 42B, and it's an okay motor. I shouldn't be so negative, except I am.
That's positive. Alwyn,
I'm positive that I'm negative about it.
yes. Alwyn, we didn't talk about breaking in motors, like when they're new and what you should do to a motor before you consider it to be prepared, ready for racing. Is there anything you want to tell us about that?
I did comment on that. I said I'll run 2 laps or so at slightly reduced speed.
2?
And that's yeah, I don't, with these motors, I really don't think it makes a hell of a lot of difference, Tim. At one stage, what I used to do is just, I have a little, I don't have a track at home, so I have a little test block with power to it, with a variable power supply. So I just put the car on the block with the back wheels in the air, and I'd run it for 5 minutes at 3 volts and a few minutes more at 4 volts, and then at 6 volts, and then at 9, you know, for like not even 5 minutes all in all. I haven't done that in yonks. I take the car and I take it to the track and I run it.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Is there anything that you guys have done with, when you talked about gearing and when you do like an inline, for instance, or any pinion to big cog, do you guys ever do like a heat gun? And like if you have a plastic, no, you don't. Okay.
I've never done it. I think John did it at one stage. I'm not sure, but I've not been brave enough.
Okay. Yeah, the only reason I heard was that to make it a better fit so that it wouldn't have any slop, or would be a smoother engagement and all that sort of thing.
I must say that for most of the RTR cars, especially if you've got slotteds or NSR or something like that, their gears are good enough that I've never found the need. The only cars that I've ever found that had high spots on the gears are BRM 124th cars. Their gears at one stage were pretty warped. So you had to check the lash at several points around the circumference to get it and set it for the sort of happy medium. And I'm not talking about a satisfied spiritualist.
Like, I think Perry went and did one car like that. He put heat to it. He says you have to really be careful, but you don't want to. You put too much heat to it and you warp the frame.
Yeah, it has to be a directed, like a heat gun or something.
I think he went and ordered a gun or something to be able to try it, to do it too.
Yeah, don't use a welding torch.
You end up using a hair dryer with a little attachment on it.
Yeah, I think so.
It helped a little bit as far as the vibration, but you couldn't really say it had a lot. I think it is, what is it? Cloverleaf Racing or some Australian group, when they set up their cars, they sometimes recommend doing that. I've seen that on the videos a couple of times.
Yeah, the couple of videos I've watched for that, they've the one I can tell it does different though is it makes it quieter.
Yeah.
No, well, he said it lessened the vibration.
Well, quieter immediately means that there's, less
better
noise is good, because noise is energy lost.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find, the good brands like Slotted and NSR, I've not bothered. And don't use an oxyacetylene torch. Don't use a welding torch on it.
Not even a Bic.
No, you could have a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Guys, I'm going to sign off and wish you all a great evening.
Thanks very much,
You too,
Tim.
Murray.
Have a glorious rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.
I'm gonna go too. I got some dinner to cook. So we'll see you next time.
Good
Yeah.
stuff.